Vance is a person who's angry at the world, and it seems that that anger initially was directed against his own community of sort of lower downscale whites and Appalachians, and has morphed into an anger primarily at the American elite and the
Mm.
existing government establishment.
Let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump and his running mate JD Vance, who I know that you've interviewed, and then I would love to pick your mind on Joe Biden in about 5 or so minutes time as well. So we'll cram that in too. But
All
we've
right.
we've been sort of diving into Project 2025. It's been called a blueprint for the Republican platform. It's not been officially adopted by the Republican Party, by the GOP, but there are several ideas in it which they will hope will be adopted by the Republicans. Why is it causing such consternation amongst voters in America? Why are some voters being incredibly sniffy about it?
Well, Project 2025 is, as policy documents go, at once extremely boring and exceptionally dangerous. It's written, if you actually bother to read the document, in this really dry, precise legal language. It's by policy wonks for policy wonks, at least in theory. Except the policies that it's proposing, when you get into it, are unbelievably radical. Right. They include, for instance, banning the mailing of abortion pills around the country and potentially even prosecuting the people who do that. They involve firing tens of thousands of civil servants and replacing them with Trump loyalist types. They involve putting political appointees in charge of the Justice Department, eroding the independence of federal prosecutors. They involve taking away supervision of election law from the Civil Rights Department, which is designed to ensure nonpartisan elections and its administration and prevent discrimination, and handing it over to basically political appointees in the criminal division who would be tasked with investigating fictitious voter fraud. These are just a smattering of policies and ones that I'm familiar with off the top of my head. But the document's massive. It's 920 pages, and there's a lot more where this comes from on everything from closing the weather service that provides Americans with free daily forecasts, to revamping the State Department along preferred political lines, to shuttering our equivalent of the BBC, which houses both NPR and PBS, the radio and broadcasting arms. It's
But
wild.
yeah, I mean, much of it you can sort of, understand if you know the Republican playbook. If you've been listening to the conversations that have been happening at the RNC this week, you can kind of understand where those policy ideas come from. The weather one, though, I have to ask about that, Zach. Why would you want to get rid of free national weather forecasts provided by the state?
Well, Project 2025 is basically a convening house document of conservatives of all different stripes and all different variants that they try to harmonize it with each other. So you get some of the stuff about the really strong executive, right? Hence getting rid of, putting presidential control over all of these theoretically independent political agencies. You get social conservatives wanting to restrict abortion rights, all sorts of different things. But you also have a lot of small government conservatives writing some of these chapters, people who have a radical view about what the federal government should and shouldn't be doing. And so you have a proposal in Project 2025 from one of those people. Each chapter is authored by a different person.
Mm.
So they
So
reflect
it's
these multivocal viewpoints,
Yeah,
right?
so it's meant to be a collection of ideas rather than here is your blueprint for policy. Because it's 922 pages long. There are probably bits of it that diverge from each other, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, each chapter is devoted to a separate topic, right? So they may diverge in ideology, but not in content, right? And
Okay.
sort of the underpinning of where they're coming from. The idea, in theory, is that it is really a comprehensive blueprint and a group of suggestions. By which I mean, each one represents the individual author's viewpoint, but any one of them can be picked up by Trump administration officials if Trump does win a second term, and then implemented instantaneously. A lot of it is designed to avoid congressional oversight, right? They say, well, look, Congress, we don't want to trust Congress. We want to give an idea that the president can do directly without any kind of congressional interference. And so they propose some things sometimes that are dubiously legal in terms of how they would work. They rely on pretty bold assertions of presidential power. But nonetheless, it is stuff that Trump could start doing on day one if he gets the right people in charge of doing those things. And by the way, the other reason it's so upsetting is the links to the Trump campaign are very clear. I mean, there are over 140 former Trump officials who are involved in drafting the document. So that gives you a sense of why people are taking it so seriously as a policy blueprint.
He has said, hasn't he, Donald Trump, I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who's behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal.
Yeah, I mean, he would say that, right? Trump has this really finger in the wind ability to kind of get the pulse of where people are going and try to tack in that direction when it doesn't cut directly against his personal or financial interests. And so he's trying to disavow himself from something that polls very poorly. I would not believe anything that he says on this front, in part because he has very close ties to the Heritage Foundation, which is the think tank that convened Project 2025. So many of his own former officials were involved. He's directly praised many of the people who were involved in it. Some of his own, the RNC policy platform was written by, that's supposed to really represent Trump's view and his policy view for the entire party. That was written by one of the authors in Project 2025, right? This is not just a conjuration of liberal fantasies, which has happened before, right? A lot of the speculation about Trump and Russia I wrote at the time was kind of wild and over the top relative to what was actually true and what we knew
Yeah.
about connections between the two parties. But when it comes to Trump and Project 2025, no, those connections are very clear. This is not hyperbole, it's real.
I spoke to Niall Gardner from the Heritage Foundation, which, as you said, masterminded Project 2025. I spoke to him yesterday alongside my colleague Adam Bolton. This is how Niall Gardner defines Project 2025.
Well, Project 2025 is a project that's been in place for many years in preparation for a future U.S. Administration. It is not geared towards any one specific candidate. It merely outlines a large number of conservative policy proposals for a future U.S. administration. So any think tank in Washington can put forward a project like this, and basically its goal is to advance a conservative policy ideas, really.
Is that fair, Zach?
I mean, yes and no, right? So it is fair in the sense that it is true that this could have been written for any Republican presidential candidate. That is to say, it's designed to advance conservative goals, but it also depends on how you define conservative, right? A lot of the policies are well beyond what would have been thinkable even in, say, the George W. Bush administration. Even in the first Trump administration, it wasn't until the very end when he tried to implement something called Schedule F, which was a way of restructuring the federal bureaucracy to fire career civil servants, that anything like the staffing proposals in Project 2025 had really been attempted by this president. I mean, we've had decades, over a century, of nonpartisan civil service in this country. Right, it's the backbone of the federal government. It's what allows for continuity between administrations and coherent and successful implementation of state policies. So they are like, it is true that the policy is designed to advance conservative policy goals. Excuse me, the document is designed to advance conservative policy goals. It's just that what they define conservative to mean is nothing like what the term used to mean in mainstream American discourse. It now, I mean, functionally in the way that, like, if you match up what the document says, what it actually is calling for, and what, ideological descriptor might be best suited to fit it, the most appropriate term is radical, or maybe even, as I'm partial to for my book title, reactionary.
It's like the old Republican Party, isn't it, versus the Trump insurgency. And there was
Yeah.
a split in the Republican Party that we saw a lot in 2015, 2016. Of course, it got the better of Donald Trump. In the end, many traditional Republicans, conservatives, really upset with how he'd run his government, particularly upset over Jan 6. And now now we're in the era of the Trump insurgency again. Let's talk about JD Vance. This is someone that you have interviewed. What is Vance like? What does he represent? He's making a huge speech at the convention this evening.
Yeah, look, I've interviewed a lot of members of Congress in my life and being a journalist in Washington. And Vance is definitely on the smarter end of the spectrum. He was really friendly to me in a way that sometimes Republican legislators are not. They know I'm a liberal ideologically, and they don't really want to talk to me. But he was willing to talk. We engaged on how he saw foreign countries serving as a model for the American conservative movement. Um, the issue here, though, is that the political persona Vance has fashioned for himself is basically to the authoritarian extreme of where the Republican Party is. So as friendly and as smart and as capable as he's clearly well written and well read, or a good writer and well read, he is also, whether or not by sincere conviction or merely as a matter of public positioning, an authoritarian candidate. And I hate to say that, it sounds extreme and partisan, but honestly, it's the only way to describe some of Vance's policies, the things that he said in public.
That's curious. So what is going on here?
Well, that's a question of some dispute in the Vance watching world. Many people think that he had this conversion to extreme Trumpism. He said that if he were Mike Pence in 2020, he would have acted on Trump's orders to overturn the 2020 election, which would have caused a constitutional crisis in the United States. And Vance has said, yeah, he'd be willing to do that. That's just to show you how far out there he is. Now, many think that he is just, he wanted to run for Senate in Ohio in 2022, and just magically he had this view, this conversion to Trumpism at just the right time. But I'm not quite sure that's it. So just sort of by sheer luck, I was friends with Vance's law school roommate, who's now a state senator in Georgia. And so I talked to him. His name's Josh McLaurin, and I talked to Josh for a while. And what what Josh said to me is that the through line between old JD and new JD is anger. The man is angry at the world. He has lots of reasons to be angry based on his upbringing. His famous book, Hillbilly Elegy, details a rather difficult childhood and a difficult transition into the American elite after that. But Vance is a person who's angry at the world. And it seems that anger initially was directed against his own community of sort of lower downscale whites and Appalachians, and has morphed into an anger primarily at the American elite and the existing government establishment.
The establishment,
I've seen,
yeah.
Yeah, and that is, I'm inclined, if gun to my head, make me pick, is JD Vance being sincere or is he making this up? He really believes it, right? He really believes what he's saying, and he has the zeal of a convert. Which many of us have seen in religious converts in our own life, only now applied to national American politics.
Yeah. You can't wear a mask for that long. And you can't wear a mask and become the vice president pick either, can you really? So yeah, he has to have conviction behind his beliefs. I suppose it then leaves the question, if we've got old JD and new JD, is there a future JD Vance?